In this video, we're going to be looking at the word logos in Greek, and I want to make a point in this video about word for word Bible translation. A lot of times when people think about Bible translation, they will say, well, I really want something that is word for word. And it depends what you mean by that. If you mean you want to get words that correlate as much as possible with the original language and try to use the word order of the original language as much as possible, to some degree you can get a word-for-word translation. But what I want to show in this video is that you really can't get a literal word-for-word translation, because even if you try to find a word in English that correlates with the original language, you may find a definition that overlaps a good amount of the time, but you will not find a definition that perfectly correlates with the total meaning of a specific word in the original language. So that's why I wanted to look at this specific example. It's the Greek term logos. A lot of you know what this means in English, at least the basic definition of the word. I want to point out from a really good book, and I recommend it. It's called One Bible, Many Versions. Are All Translations Created Equal by Dave Brunn. And in this book, one section here, he says, if I were to ask you what logos means, you would probably say it means word. I think that's the definition a lot of us have been given for the term logos. So if someone says, how do you translate logos? Our basic understanding for a lot of us is that you would translate it as word. If it's a word-for-word translation, then logos should be translated word. But he says here that is only partially correct. Word is the most common way to translate logos into English, but it is not the only way. And he's going to make a really important and powerful point here, showing some examples. He says the KJV translated logos 24 different ways. Think about that. The King James Version, which people think of as being quite literal, translates the term logos 24 different ways. Here's a list of the KJV renderings of logos. And this really shows you how a term in one language does not perfectly correlate with a term in another language. So the term logos in the King James Version, you see here various ways that the term is translated. It can mean account, cause, communication, doctrine, so on and so forth. A lot of different definitions here or translations of this one word, logos. He says the word logos occurs inconspicuously in some very familiar verses. The average reader of the KJV may be surprised to learn the various places where logos is used. The following chart lists several occurrences of logos in the King James New Testament. The words used by the KJV to translate logos in each of these contexts are included in parentheses under the word logos. So here is what you would be reading in Greek, at least this one word here in Greek, in each of these passages. And some of you are familiar with this. In Acts 1:1, it says, the former logos have I made, O Theophilus. Now, if we were to just put word there, the former word I have made, that would not make sense. And yet that's the definition of logos that a lot of people think is the correct definition. There are also translations that say we want to be extremely consistent in how we translate one word from one language to another. Now, I think to some degree you can strive for consistency. But this shows here, if you were to put, instead of treatise, you were to put the word word there, it would not make sense. Whereas if you say the former treatise have I made, O Theophilus, that makes a lot more sense. Or the former account, something like that. Romans 14:12, so then every one of us shall give account of himself to God. Well, here the Greek word is logos. And that is translated as account in various translations, including the King James Version. Here's another example. I'll go to 1 Corinthians 2:1. I came not with excellency of. How would you translate this? Well, the word again is logos, but Here you can see it's translated in the KJV as speech. I came not with excellency of speech. Makes a lot more sense. Here's an expression in Acts 20:24 that's interesting. But of no logos, neither count I my life dear unto myself. In the King James Version, it's none of these things move me. And here's another interesting one he gives, Matthew 5:32. Whosoever shall put away his wife, save for the logos, the word of fornication, doesn't make sense there, save for the cause of fornication. The point is you have to use different words that convey the nuances of the meaning of logos. Logos has a certain range of meaning, and it doesn't totally match the meaning of a particular word in English. Hence, you have a lot of different definitions, even in the King James Version, a lot of different translations for the term logos. So I just wanted to show you this, recommend this book to you, and really make the point that when you are thinking about Bible translation, we really do need to be careful that we're not taking the idea of word for word too far, especially if we're misunderstanding our translation of choice and we say, well, I have a translation that's word for word, and we can misunderstand what that means, because this is a really good example of how a term in Greek does not really correlate with any one term in English. And so we can get really hung up on these things. People will even argue about it. The correct translation of logos should be word. Well, it really does depend on the context, because there are different nuances of meaning for the term logos depending on the context. Now, I do think there is a place for more literal renderings, more literal-oriented translations. However, I think this kind of example shows you that there really is a case to be made for a certain amount of flexibility when it comes to translation, and that sometimes it's actually more accurate to use different words for a specific word in the original language in order to convey the nuance of meaning in the receptor language. So something to keep in mind. I'd love to hear what you think about this in the comment section. Was this an example that you were not familiar with? Did this open your eyes to anything that you didn't realize before? Let me know in the comments section any thoughts that you have on this subject. And thank you so much for taking some time to listen to some of my thoughts on this, brought to you from A Frisch Perspective.